I think the most obvious, at least in like the world that I'm in and where this could be used is MEV. I think you have to be very careful about the way that's designed. And yeah, it just lets you like move faster and you could potentially try things faster that the protocol can't do. Solana is a very fast moving protocol. So like maybe that is potentially less valid, but I do think like you can try things to potentially modify the protocol and see if it works or not without actually spending the time to like bake it into the protocol. But there's you have to be careful in like what you're doing and make sure you're thinking about any like second order effects of what could go wrong. There's certain like doors like that once you open them, you can't really close them.
Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Namada, the shielded asset hub rewarding you to protect the multi-chain. So not only can you protect your own data across any asset and any chain, but you also get shielding rewards for strengthening data privacy protections for everyone. So you can check them out at namada.net and follow their mainnet launch. Stick around, you're going to be hearing all about them later in the program.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer, the views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. This is the final interview episode of the restaking season, so we got a really special episode for you. Joined by my trusty co-host, Miles O'Neill, and today we're interviewing Lucas Bruder, aka Buffalo. The man himself from Jito. Lucas, welcome, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you back on the show, dude. Well, we're talking just a day after you unveiled the long-rumored Jito restaking platform. So huge congratulations on getting that out the door. And we got a bunch of questions for you just about the architecture of the platform and some of the differences that might exist in the market for ETH restaking versus Sol restaking. But before we get there, can you just give us the history of why you decided to launch a restaking platform and where it sits within the entire suite? Because right now, Jito has been incredibly impressive in tackling these huge markets. There's the MEV product that you guys have, there's liquid staking, and now you're adding restaking to that. So can you just kind of even just like give us a little bit of a history of which problems you started working on at Jito first and how that led to the existing product suite and where restaking belongs there?
Yeah, a quick history on like Jito, how we got here. Started working on MEV in the beginning, and I think kind of realized pretty quickly that we could create a flywheel with Jito Sol in the MEV stack. So then got into liquid staking, and then I would say like mid 2023, we started kind of ideating on StakeNet, which was like our way of decentralizing stake pools on Solana and liquid staking tokens. For those that don't know, Solana's delegated proof of stake, and when you run a stake pool, you have a bunch of stake. You need to figure out where does the stake go to which validators. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that, but we wanted I guess the main point is that like there's someone has to do that or something has to do that. And for a lot of stake pools in Solana, there's just like a hot wallet that basically does it. And we realized that if we wanted liquid staking to grow and be massive on Solana, then that hot wallet would kind of be a point of concern for potential like security issues related to like hacks and things like that. So started developing StakeNet. And then I would say like late 2023, we kind of saw what was going on with Eigen Layer. And then also like as we started ideating on StakeNet more, there's a few pieces that even within StakeNet that need to be decentralized. There's a few like oracles and things like that. And we also saw the kind of uptick in Eigen Layer and like how many liquid staking tokens were getting. It's kind of like a vacuum for liquid staking tokens. And So, in the like spirit of decentralizing things further on StakeNet and the like opportunity for liquid staking tokens, started to look into restaking, I would say like October, November of last year. And then I would say like December and January, I really started diving into starting to like design it and think about it and code it. And yeah, it's gone through like a few iterations, but pretty happy with the way that ended up and the code that's open source.
I think that whole arc makes a lot of sense. I'd love to get a sense of like what these iterations were. Were there like design choices that you felt strongly about, going into the architecture, design process that you kind of did a 180 on, or at least like maybe made less opinionated when you were designing the system?
Yeah. So yeah, the first iteration was, I guess we think that restaking is going to look different on Solana than Ethereum. And like, maybe there's some aspects of restaking where you're taking like staked assets like LSTs or stake SOL and using it to secure things. And then there's, I think, a large component of it's going to be governance tokens or utility tokens. There's a lot of activity. It's very cheap to send transactions on Solana. So I think there's just a lot of bots and a lot of automation involved with a lot of protocols in Solana. And so, TBD if restaking is the right word for that, but that's what we called it. And so, like, I guess the goal is like make it flexible for protocols. If they want to use LSTs, they can. If they want to use their own governance tokens, like how much security does a keeper actually need? Does it actually need like a bunch of security? Also, if you have a governance token, like you probably want to use it for something utility related. And so like that was kind of the first thing that we thought about. The first system, I know we talked a little bit about it. The first one was isolated. It's like an isolated security model. So basically like every AVS was isolated from each other. And the thought there was like, how much security do you actually need? Pooled is very risky. If you have like a slashing event, it can have massive cascading effects. Isolated, you don't really need to think about that. It's like everything is isolated to its own AVS. And then it kind of mimicked I think the Solana staking model is pretty elegant. So it kind of mimicked that in some sense. But then the more I like was talking to people, it was like, if this isn't pooled, someone might build like a pooled wrapper on it, or there might be certain use cases where it's like, it kind of fragments the liquidity and fragments the security. So if you have like, if there is a world where there's a bunch of L2s that have a bunch of TVL and Solana, then your isolated model would look weird, or like you'd have to have like AVSs like merging together to like meet their security requirements. So kind of went back to the drawing board, thought that pooled is a good option. Also saw the
Lucas,
uptick.
can you just like say
Yeah.
like what's an example like concretely of where that might get a little hairy, like in a world of like an isolated security world where maybe there are like L2s on Solana? Like what's a real life situation that could happen where like that model starts to break down, just to make it a little concrete?
Yeah, like I guess the instances where like there's an L2 that requires a lot of security, and there's another L2 that comes online that requires a lot of security. And if that L2 can like, if you're in the isolated model, then that maybe you have like the L2 vampire attack the other one and the security goes down a lot, and then there might be bad ramifications from that.
Got it. Okay.
Kind of like it's a cost and availability, like supply availability question, right? So like isolated and low liquidity tokens are probably going to cost the most, right? To be able to like attract just for stake, right? And tokens that everybody already holds and that are already earning yield, probably the cheapest. So I do understand that.
Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of like the first design. And then there's a few things that the realizing that like maybe pooled isn't that bad if you can have the right restrictions in place and like controls, and the risk is easy to audit. And then also saw the adoption of LRTs, and Jito Sol is a liquid staking token that represents Solana stake accounts that are not liquid. And so we were like, okay, let's like, I was kind of worried if you like release that, then there might be, it might not get the full adoption that it deserves, and it doesn't necessarily meet like the high bar that we want the protocol and the products to have. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, ended up building the LRTs into the protocol. So the only way to stake is through an LRT. And also ended up adding, there's a lot of bi-directional agreements that take place between all the parties involved. So you can control the risk, and you can actually audit the risk. And there's like caps on slashing and things like that. So you can actually like fully understand the risk on chain, and people have the liquidity of the LRTs, and the actual assets that are used for the LRTs are like, it's kind of up to the LRT creator. AVS can decide if they want to do it or not. So the AVSs could like support certain assets, or they can be selective on the LRTs. Like if they see a LRT is like just degenning into everything, maybe they don't want to support that because the security could get pulled out from underneath them. So the second version is just very flexible. It's kind of like a combination of a restaking protocol for LSTs, and then also just like a generic staking protocol for any type of token on Solana.
Just one thing to clarify: if let's say one of the vaults supports like 3 AVSs, two of the AVSs are only using, let's say Jito Sol, right, as collateral, and the third AVS is using a governance token and Jito Sol. Is the LRT that is minted from that vault, like if I deposit just Jito Sol to that vault, is the LRT a representation of the Jito Sol that's been deposited and the third underlying governance token, or does that have its like a different?
That would be a different LRT.
Okay, so that
would be like a stake token.
So it's not like you don't just mint a derivative token that represents everything that the vault really is like supporting. That's right?
Well, a vault supports a single, on Solana they call it a token mint. On Ethereum it'd be like a contract address for like a ERC20.
Okay.
So like you could use Jito Sol, Jito Pith, whatever that is. If you wanted to mix assets, then you could basically create another token in a different program, and like that would be responsible for balancing the assets. And then you would create the vault and like the LRT with that kind of wrapped mixture token. It's like if you want to create like a like index Sol or whatever, where it's like you want an LRT that has multiple assets backing it, then you would create like a token wrapper, and then you would use that to create the vault. Hopefully, like you don't want to be mixing like LSTs and highly volatile assets. I mean, maybe people do, but it's like my current thought that's weakly held is just kind of like let the market decide what it wants, and like people will figure it out, and like everything will be available on chain, so you'll be able to see what's going on.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges with LRTs on Ethereum is that it's really expensive to like do these rebalancing actions, and really expensive to claim token rewards or to liquidate, AVS reward tokens to ETH. All of that kind of goes away on Solana. which I think is really nice.
Yeah, I mean it's like a penny or less than a penny to rebalance your vault and like where it's delegating. And you know, I think another thing, uh, we're still thinking about rewards, like that hasn't been designed yet, but there might be some vaults that want to distribute rewards to stakers, and like maybe they're more like aligned, or I think like aligned with the AVSs that they're delegating to, and then maybe there's vaults that like just want to like sell it and kind of auto compound it into the asset, and hoping to like figure out a way that leaves that flexible.
That's another thing where you can just kind of let the market, decide, right? Um,
Hopefully the like frameworks are figured out to where um, there's like a few different ways that you can kind of just like copy and paste of doing it, but the protocol tries to like the goal of the protocol I think should just kind of be like let the market figure it out, and hopefully there's like a pattern that emerges for these things.
cool. I agree. I guess the other major area of like complexity of on Ethereum is has to do with native stake, right? So reading beacon chain balances and communicating that to the execution layer. Have you guys said we're doing all LSTs, or as native was native stake like a consideration for you?
We have certainly thought about it. It's not actually like built into the protocol, but as I was talking about earlier, like you create a LRT or the staked asset from a token mint. That's not a Solana stake account isn't a token mint. So you could basically like wrap stake accounts in a token, but then you've like kind of created a stake pool there. So like you might as well just use like an LST or something.
It makes sense.
Because that program's been audited like the SPL stake pool has been audited like 8 or 9 times. It holds billions of dollars of assets. Um, so yes, someone could create that if they wanted to.
So maybe just Lucas to repeat some of this back that you've said so far. Like the history, if I'm following this correctly, is you started working on MEV, realized there was a flywheel with liquid staking, the flywheel being the MEV infrastructure, and a lot of the MEV that was being generated on Solana at the time that you guys started working was relatively immature. And so if you're able to extract more or like build more efficient blocks, essentially, or build the infrastructure that allows that type of more sophisticated building, that goes into the yield of the LST product, and that's the sort of flywheel. And as you built out a lot of the infrastructure around that liquid staking, and like the staking pool part of your business, like notably StakeNet, there were these sort of points of centralization that you started to notice, and that's what ultimately led you to the restaking portion of your business, which that's the architecture that we've just been discussing right now. And the reason I feel like that's very cool to call out is just because I don't know. I think there's actually an element of similarity between you guys and Eigen Layer, where like a lot of people, I think the perception of Eigen Layer is that they started with the restaking, but I really think what they actually started with was the data availability problem, and then in trying to solve the DA problem for rollups, they sort of backed into the back end infrastructure that they would need to do that, and then recognized that that would be a challenge for other protocols as well. Um, and so I'd love to get a sense of, in either the MEV part of your business, or like maybe some specific elements on the liquid staking side of things, like anything that you can feel comfortable talking to. Like what were some of those sort of points of centralization maybe where you could see restaking making sense?
Yeah, I guess a quick comment on what you just said too. I think there's definitely applications for it in MEV, and that's something that is being researched. Um, but yeah, like another thing is like there's a few things that I'll get into in a second that you could add staking and economic security for, and like you could go ahead and build out that to be specific for that application. Like, okay, we have application or AVSA that needs staking, go build that out, and you have AVSB and we'll build out a different staking, or maybe it's the same. It's like, well, why don't we just like kind of saw what's going on with Eigen Layer, and like why isn't it just more generic than that? So spent the extra few months kind of working on something generic, and that's how it ended up where it is. As far as the applications go, like there's definitely applications in MEV that we're researching. And then one is like there's some Oracle components in StakeNet that we would like to decentralize. The cool thing about Solana is that you don't have this like separate, you don't have like a beacon chain for Solana. So there is a lot of execution data, and like you can derive like how much stake, or you can derive like how many, like how well is a validator voting, and other information available on Solana without needing an Oracle. You can just like read an account, and it's kind of like if for those familiar with Ethereum, you just kind of like read an account or read a program or call a function to get that information. There's a few things that aren't available like that on Solana, where you have to like run some off-chain thing and calculate it and upload it. And so that's like a perfect example. It's just like something like kind of small, where it's like, okay, this like thing is, going to control the pool, and you want it to be trusted. And so that's kind of like a pretty small application. And yeah, that's kind of like something that we're looking into as far as restaking goes. There's some other MEV ones that I'm not ready to share yet, but should see more info at some point.
So yeah, I think it would be awesome to hear just kind of like the range of use cases that you've identified so far, and in particular, ones that we think are kind of Solana specific, or like more important on Solana than, let's say, like Ethereum ones. And so this first one is, basically identifying like central points of failure that are, controlled by some trusted setup, right? Either like off chain or like a hot wallet or something else like that. And I think we're at an interesting point kind of in Solana's broader evolution for restaking to be coming out, because, on Ethereum, it's like we had already kind of moved towards this roll-up centric modular roadmap, which fragmented a lot of security assumptions, right? Like different roll-ups have very different models. In Solana, where, it's still not like super clear, like just how much that's going to map over, but we are hearing, the first like mumblings of roll-ups, and, I think like moving towards that direction. So I guess, did that also come into your mind as like, okay, well, maybe there's some pretty narrow use cases when everything is on one place? Maybe there's not, maybe there's more, but yeah, I'm curious, like what you think are the most exciting forward-looking use cases.
Yeah, I think like the most obvious ones are like oracles. There's several Oracle protocols in Solana that, TBD on what type of security they need. I think it's kind of up to them, whether it's governance token based or LSTs. But like when there's a lot of like Solana congestion and things like that, there's a lot of Oracle issues. Like if you're using any protocols that relied on oracles, it was pretty hard like to use them. You'd see like stale Oracle data, and like there wasn't really any, like, as far as I know, like maybe there's stuff going on behind the scenes, but the incentive for those people, for those like Oracle providers, for the protocols to do better wasn't necessarily there. And so like we started seeing some of them start to use Jito bundles, and like they started to change to pull oracles and things like that. But I would like to see like more action, and like the best way to kind of encourage action is either rewards or punishing people that aren't doing well, that can be doing better. So I think that's an obvious one. The stuff that we're talking about, like keepers and things like that, those are pretty obvious. There's actually a decent amount of keepers doing like oracles and rebalancing on Solana, and like rebalancing liquidity pools and things like that, that I think is a good use case. There's definitely a lot of like SVM type like L2s coming out. As far as I know, like I think Zeta has announced one.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's I don't want to like reveal any information that's not public yet.
It's all right.
Yeah.
But there's a few others that are coming out. So they, I don't know what their security model will look like, but
Right.
that's kind of like moving independent of what you think of that roadmap. It is kind of funny. Like there's like people that are like, the Solana people are hating on L2s and now they're coming and people are excited. And now it's like kind of the same with restaking, but obviously like that's a good use case for it as well. Some of the SVM L2s.
Do you see some path dependency with, all right, so Solana in some ways is a little bit behind some of like the scaling strategies that Ethereum is, like L2s, right? There aren't any L2s in, I guess Zeta is live today, but restaking didn't exist when Ethereum was thinking about launching L2s to begin with. Do you think there's like some path dependency here where one thing that this makes me think about is basically restaking is kind of like spinning up a bespoke, consensus, right? And so maybe actually now that restaking is live, it would be easier to actually start with not just having one centralized sequencer on your L2s, because it's really easy to kind of spin up a quorum there and procure security. And I don't know, is there a path dependency with this side of thing now that restaking exists?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, there are certainly protocols that are reaching out that were saying they were going to do something on Ethereum that are kind of interested in what this protocol is and want to learn more about it. So I think that certainly is happening. And then, I think it's just one less thing to think about. Like that seems to be kind of something people are excited about for the L2 roadmap on Ethereum. And so, instead of like building out this staking infrastructure and security and all that stuff, you can kind of it will exist for you on Solana when you're ready to launch.
Quick question on two of those use cases you just mentioned, so the oracles and the keepers. I'm going to try to like contrast it to Eigen Layer's approach to tackling those same use cases. So one is this, idea of like, who are the operators? Do they have to be Solana validators, right? Or which I'm guessing today, like the keepers and the data feed providers are not necessarily Solana validators, right? And so is that a consideration of like specialized versus, going to the base layer operators?
They do not need to be a Solana validator. For stuff like oracles, like I would guess that most of the people running oracles on Solana are not validators, so that will work for them. If that's like a requirement of your AVS for some reason, then you can enforce that for the operators in your set.
Can't really imagine that many cases where they have to be, but like maybe there are. Yeah.
Maybe if you like, I think the most obvious use case where this would be true, or it could be true, is for like MEV related things or things that are related directly to block space.
Yeah.
That could potentially be a thing. But the thing, Solana doesn't have staking, or Solana doesn't have slashing built in.
Right.
So like this, and it has delegation. So like when you slash the validator, you are on Ethereum, you're slashing the delegator, but Solana doesn't have slashing. The validator operator in Solana doesn't necessarily have to have stake on their own validator. So it looks a little different. But I imagine the overlap between like running a validator and running other types of software that you need high uptime on that involve staking, it's a very similar skill set. So I imagine there will be a lot of operators that want to support whatever protocol it is.
Yep. Makes a ton of sense. Will be interesting to, and you could probably even map over a lot of this StakeNet methodologies and logic to track like the effectiveness of AVS operators, even if they're not also validators. But definitely, I would imagine there's some synergies there.
Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by
Namada, the shielded asset hub protecting the future of the multi-chain. Namada is a chain that's near and dear to my heart because in previous seasons of Bell Curve, we've talked about how the cardinal original sin of most blockchains is not thinking about privacy from the beginning, but also because if we want to onboard a whole bunch of applications, it doesn't work in a default transparency setting. So Namada not only brings about a better future that we all want, but it's going to help onboard a ton of new applications. So Namada introduces a novel shielding reward system. The way that it works is if you hold your assets in the shielded set, you help strengthen Namada's data protection guarantees and collect non-rewards in return. Namada will initially support IBC and Ethereum-based assets, but eventually the idea is for this to expand into a comprehensive hub for all assets. Really, really excited about what the folks over at Namada are doing. I highly recommend that you go and check them out at namada.net. You can follow their mainnet launch, which is soon TM. Very exciting. Tell them that I sent you. Click the link, bottom of the show notes.
My second question is, in the announcement talking about the Oracle example, we're talking about things like downtime or incorrect price submissions. And you have Eigen Layer, who has put out a whole token, right? The intersubjective work token to be able to handle these kind of faults. With Symbiotic, it feels like they're not necessarily prescribing a way to handle those, non-objective faults, but you can.
They're using an Oracle.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's my understanding.
Who's securing that Oracle? I'm just kidding. But
One token.
yeah, exactly. I'm curious how you're thinking about that, or like if you thought about other ways to be able to support something like downtime.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to the point earlier where it's just kind of let the market decide. I'm sure, like, if you have stronger opinions, then reach out to me if you're watching this on like how that should be handled. But the current thought is like let the market decide. The possibilities of what you can do with the system are kind of like up to you. Like it doesn't put any restrictions into place. I think that was the one thing that I wasn't the biggest fan of with the Eigen Layer design, where it's like only ETH. Like every AVS is gonna have a token and they want to use that token. Obviously, like they're working on dual governance and whatnot, and like that will somewhat address for that. But from the beginning, kind of just want to let the market decide. And so like for slashing, it's pretty flexible. Like you could imagine, I mean, maybe you have like some LSTs in something with a lot of security for very cheap, doing like, if there's like a bad price that gets uploaded and it has a large impact, you slash that. Or if they have downtime for like 6 hours, then you can also have people stake their governance token and they slash that. You could even have like a third or fourth token. Like, it's kind of up to you on what you want to do. So you can, I think, does Symbiotic have like, I think they have like a slashing window or something as well, and like where you can like reject slashes from like committees and things like that.
Right. It's like a bring your own veto committee kind of thing, which again, like Eigen Layer kind of put forward their own veto committee. I don't think they're thinking about doing that anymore, but I think it reflects, it's really interesting when Eigen Layer's sort of go to market was a little bit more supply side oriented, right? It was about let's get, export the trust of ETH, right, to other networks. Let's get value flowing back down to ETH validators and stakers, as a lot of value capture actually goes up to roll ups, right? And it feels like your counter positioning or Symbiotics as well is much more demand side centric. Kind of put out an extraordinarily flexible sort of platform and let the AVS side use it however they want. I think feels like that probably was a good second mover advantage that you guys had.
Yeah, I think like for, how do I say this? I can engagement bait on like Ethereum and other protocols and all that stuff on Twitter, and I think a lot of people do, but there's a lot to learn, and I think we've learned a lot from a lot of the protocols that have kind of led, and like hoping to take those learnings and kind of like chart your own path. I think that's like can be valuable. First mover can be valuable in certain cases, but not always the most valuable.
Lucas, we've sort of been dancing around the, or like talking about this in an indirect way, but you said at the top of this episode that you think that the dynamics of restaking are going to play out very differently in Solana than they did in Ethereum, and some of that has to do with Solana's architecture, maybe, and there's not like separate consensus and execution layers, so more data, things like that. But what are some of the big differences that you see? And I'm reminded of the conversation that we had during the liquid staking season, where liquid staking and has played out in almost mirrored, like very different ways in Ethereum versus Solana. It's like very poor staking UX at the beginning led to very high penetration of liquid staking, whereas in Solana, there was delegated proof of stake from the beginning, so very high stake rate but very low penetration of liquid staking. And I'm curious, what are some of the similar dynamics on the restaking front, and how do you see that the market sort of playing out differently?
Yeah, Solana is very fast, very cheap. It's very low latency. Not like compute's cheap, storage is like relatively cheap. Can't store a movie on there, but like you can store kilobytes or megabytes of data on there. There's a lot of system calls that are built into Solana. Like you guys have probably seen there's like some, I'm not a ZK expert, but there's some ZK related system calls or system calls that are built into Solana. So I actually think like where restaking on Ethereum, it's really about building things off chain. And as far as I know, like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we haven't really seen anything that is actually built on chain for restaking, or even like, I guess like there
AVSs
might be some oracles
on
yeah.
L1.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, the pre-comp stuff is still like kind of in the works. I would say maybe.
Yeah. That's not necessarily like built on the, like that will be like off, like that won't be like transactions. As far as I understand, it won't be like transactions. It'll kind of just be like, there will be like another gossip layer, whatever. It's not happening on chain.
Totally.
I think on Solana, there will be a lot more of this activity and networks and AVSs running on top of Solana. And so, like Oracle is a perfect example. Like you can have people stake to oracles. Maybe their price is a stake weighted average of what the price they upload and how much stake they have. And like you can basically have something on chain where it's like if they haven't uploaded something in a minute, then they get slashed like $10 or whatever. And so that's like an example of an AVS running on chain. There's some of the like the StakeNet stuff that we're talking about. That's StakeNet's fully on Solana. Some of the other things that we're talking to others about and looking at internally are just using Solana transactions and like using a program that requires multiple operators to like come to consensus on data or keep some data fresh. And so I think this is it's like the thing that Tolly talks about is like all this stuff, all the transactions and data and transfer of data between like servers is going in blockchains is like going to trend towards zero over time. And so I think like transactions on Solana will probably trend towards zero as the transaction rate increases. So you'll see a lot more things happening on Solana. Hopefully that results in more priority fees for like certain use cases, like maybe slashes, they use priority fees, but should be just like in general more activity on Solana, which will hopefully make validators more money and stakers.
So like the difference there is that there's like an Oracle on Ethereum that's operating off chain is like coming to its own off chain consensus and then posting one kind of result back on Ethereum, right, to reduce those costs. With you, I guess more types of faults can be like locally observable because they're actually posting results back on chain. It's not like you're, posting an attestation of like a signature for work done, on some separate network, right? I don't think that actually came through to me until just now.
Yeah, I mean, you can have that if you want. There's there's a signature verification method. StakeNet actually uses it, but I think at least for like the beginning, there will likely be a decent amount of AVSs that just run fully on chain, and like they have programmatic slashing that you can actually detect on chain. TBD on how that changes over time, but I think it's kind of a like the you can just focus on like building your actual application logic in AVS. Like you don't have to, if you're going to build an Oracle on Ethereum with all this stuff, like you have to build all this other infra and don't have to really think about that.
Lucas, what do you think about the supply side of Solana restaking? So, this is where you hear people talk a lot about the moneyness of the base asset, right? And how much, and you hear this a lot in ETH liquid staking, is that it's a money and people use it in DeFi and NFTs and things like that, and that's a huge portion of the reason why the liquid staking adoption is so high. I do think there's, again, the big path dependency confounding variable there of the merge, right? And no in protocol delegation. So I would just be curious, okay, so there's this sort of very different on-chain versus off-chain kind of dynamic in Solana, but also the architectural choices of Ethereum, we talked about this at the top of the program, has lent itself to a lot of off-chain infrastructure, which might need could benefit from using economic security. So I guess like order of magnitude wise, how does that impact, I guess, the demand side relative to something like the ETH? And then do you think that there's going to be a bunch of Solana supply that comes online and says, hey, I want to opt into this same, additional yield generation opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the supply side, there is a lot of AVSs on Ethereum that are off chain that need a lot of security just because of what you just mentioned. I don't know TBD on like if Solana gets to that point or not. It seems like there are a lot of L2s. I think I can probably count of like 4 or 5 Solana L2s that are being built that will need some form of this. And so the supply might be small in the beginning, but I think we're counting on Solana just being the best place to build and the best place to do execution. And then SVM is like, I think, the gold standard in virtual machines, and there will be people that want to customize it, and maybe they want different fee markets or whatever it is. And so there will probably be some form of L2s that do certain things that that will like continue to grow over time. It's not going to go down. Like it's only going to go up from here.
Yeah.
Wanted to get your thoughts on slashing quickly. I've seen like Toli and Sriram kind of going at it, which has been fun to watch. And I do think there's probably different considerations for like slashing in the context of base layers versus slashing in the context of more narrow sort of like local specific use cases. Right. With like when, say, like we were talking to Togrel and Sunny last week, and we're talking about when, let's say, it's like a bridge operator or like a market maker for fast bridging, and you're relying on that one market maker to fill the order, right? Then it's probably good to have slashable collateral, right? It's quite different than a base layer. Then there's the second question of what to do when there is slashing. What do you do with the assets? So do you burn them or redistribute them to harmed users? And I'm curious where you fall on this and like how you're thinking about slashing within the context of restaking on Solana versus, and how it might be different than base layer slashing.
Right now it just goes back to the thing that we were talking about earlier, like let the market decide. I think there's chances that if you like encode things to happen a certain way, it might limit the use cases of what can be built on it. And so that's something that I think people should be like aware of. However, at the same time, like there might be like strange incentives that pop up if you let that happen, where like there could be incentive to get slashed if you're not burning it or redistributing it. So yeah, I don't know, like that's something we're thinking about a lot, and like that is a question that comes up a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think like the types of AVSs that we're going to see are going to be a little different, and there may be I think there will be a lot of AVSs that use LSTs, but there will also be ones that use governance tokens, and they might want a little more control over what happens to those assets. And so like right now the protocol doesn't really care, and I'm hoping that like I think this will happen. There will just be like a kind of a pattern that emerges, like maybe people build in like someone builds a resolver program where you can like slash something and the funds sit there, and then you can like customize this resolver to like send funds back if it was an accident or something. But like if you feel strongly against that, let me know. But I think like there will be some patterns that emerge, and like I guess I feel like it's so early that like I don't know, like as far as I know, like Eigen Layer is still changing the way that they think about slashing. I don't really know what Symbiotic's up to, and like I guess I just get nervous if you like encode something to happen a certain way, then it will limit the use cases, or someone will like fork it or something. And so like maybe once there's like an obvious pattern that emerges, then you can kind of take that into the protocol and let everyone get access to it. Maybe you provide better guarantees, but I think it's still like there's like I don't know how many AVSs are actually alive on Ethereum right now, and like it's been kind of seems to be like a newer or newish area of research, and like people are still undecided if the base layer needs slashing or not. So it's kind of just like let's see if there's a pattern that emerges and can take a look at that.
Lucas, what do you think the dynamics going to look like for restaking marketplaces? Are they going to be isolated to an ecosystem? Are we heading towards a world where there's one or two ETH restaking platforms and one or two Solana restaking platforms? Or, I guess this is how it's largely played out in liquid staking, right? And I think there are a couple different reasons for that. But one part of that is that it's very core to the protocol, and I think there are almost strategic. This is the whole alignment debate, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is, right. It's really critical to the base functioning of the protocol. So I think there's a lot of good reason for that alignment debate to be taking place. But that's why that's part of the reason why we've seen liquid staking kind of be pretty isolated. But if we move from, let's say, one of the things that we maybe falsely assumed because of Eigen Layer it's more of a demand market than a supply market, and suddenly it's less about like accruing native value rewards back to ETH or Sol stakers, but it's much more like, hey, I'm a protocol, I need to arrange my security apparatus here, and I want to do a lot of that using my own token. Suddenly in that world, I'm not actually sure the same dynamics are going to apply, and it's like, yeah, but you know what I mean? There's not as much of a reason for these restaking platforms to be siloed into different ecosystems. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think if you like, it's all about the AVSs. Like,
Yeah,
doesn't really matter. Like, cool, you have like a bunch of TVL, but like if there's limitations in the platform and what can be done and assets that can be used and like how slashing works and how rewards work and all these things work, it's like they're just gonna like go to build their own platform, which is like maybe kind of what we did for the use cases that we see, or they're going to go to a platform that's pretty flexible. And so like I think it's better for it to be more flexible and more generic, and like I think the ones that are more flexible will end up winning. And I think that's like I think Eigen Layer is going to have to like rework some things if they want to continue to maintain the lead. And I think that's like that was a good second mover advantage to Symbiotic. It's like, hey, let's just like kind of let that they take some opinions, but like let's let the market kind of decide what we want to happen.
if I had to put a gun to your head on an answer here, do you think 5 to 10 years from now, is it going to be like Jito is the restaking platform of Solana, Eigen Layer, Symbiotic, ETH, etc., or do you think they're going to be more cross ecosystem?
Like within each ecosystem, will there be more than one?
Yeah, like will Jito, will like the Jito restaking platform have like maybe some portion of its business is like ETH-based AVSs and Solana-based AVSs, and yeah, or do you see it being ecosystem siloed?
We haven't really. I'm gonna say like ecosystem siloed. I think we haven't really seen like what the first example that comes to mind for this is like Magic Eden, but like what, and like there might be exceptions to this. It's still pretty early, but like what protocols have been successful expanding to other chains where it's like increased their like success.
It
Like
it's really Magic Eden, but Magic Eden is a pretty
maybe
interesting
Uniswap
example.
kind of.
The interesting example also about Magic Eden is that when it expanded to ordinals, it also then grew its Solana NFT market share as well, because the common denominator there was like NFT traders. And it's like, well, if most of the trading is happening here on ordinals, then and it's also supported on Solana, like I might as well also trade my Solana NFTs here. And so I do
Yeah.
wonder, that's where I think the supply side of this market actually might be decently important here. And it's like maybe people have a strong preference for restaking Solana or Ethereum or USDC, right? That's like the like dollars, frankly, is like the other thing that might can trip everyone up.
It does feel like the aggregation layer is like already kind of happening on the supply side. Like you mentioned, you're talking to LRTs that are coming over from ETH. I just question, I think, what like it seems very complex to be working with like the switching costs seem high from the AVS side. It seems really complex to be running an AVS that leverages two different restaking platforms with different slashing and different assets. Just seems like, why are we doing this? So
Yeah.
I'm a bit skeptical on that, but I think people will try.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think I certainly think that SVM will be the dominant virtual machine in the future. Just from like a performance standpoint, everything's going towards performance. If you're not, you're going to be left behind. And so like, I think I'm betting that if you have a bunch of, whether it's running on Solana itself or you're like building an L2, then if you're not looking at SVM, then I think you're missing out. And so if you're building on SVM, like you might as well go to the base L1 that has SVM as well, because you're already kind of familiar with it and you know the intricacies. Maybe some people disagree with me because like ETH has a lot of security. I don't actually I think there's probably too much security given the current AVSs. There's just a lot of like billions of dollars of security for protocols that are kind of just bootstrapping. And so I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I think Solana has a good shot at being used for restaking.
Matching the supply and demand and pricing that appropriately seems to be a big challenge for a lot of like we've talked about this in the early days of Polkadot. Like Polkadot got something pretty close to the right end state design. What they maybe messed up was not making it permissionless and making the assumption that people would pay a lot of money for essentially that security, and it wasn't necessarily correct. Or there was also like you had to lock up for a certain amount of time and stuff like that, but that's the challenge. So I two more sort of lines of questions for you here, Lucas, which is one, I think one of the things that people are excited about on the Ethereum front, Togrel talked about it in our last episode, is if you imagine a protocol like Solana or Ethereum as an AVS or just a network in general, like restaking can unlock some features for these even like big L1s over in Ethereum land. That's pre-confirmations. That's what everyone's sort of excited about. And so maybe this is another point in the camp that these restaking platforms are going to remain siloed because that's extremely core to the underlying like roadmap design of the L1. But I think that's part of the reason why some folks over in Ethereum land are much more like positively predisposed to Eigen Layer than it looked like they were going to be a year ago, because it's kind of like, hey, actually, if we can do something like Pepsi, which Barnaby was leading and very excited about, maybe we can actually like move faster on some of these protocol improvements that otherwise would have taken an enormous amount of time to push through the EIP process. And so I'm wondering if you see the same opportunity on Solana, right? Like, do you see restaking as being like some sort of driver to the Solana roadmap? And if so, where is that?
Yeah, I think the most obvious, at least in like the world that I'm in, where this could be used is MEV. I think you have to be very careful about the way that's designed, and yeah, it just lets you like move faster, and you could potentially try things faster that the protocol can't do. Solana is a very fast moving protocol, so like maybe that is potentially less valid, but I do think like you can try things to potentially modify the protocol and see if it works or not, and kind of without actually spending the time to like bake it into the protocol. But there's you have to be careful in like what you're doing, and make sure you're thinking about any like second order effects of what could go wrong. And like there's certain like doors like that once you open them you can't really close them. Like I mean, there's a lot of path dependency in PBS, but that's like kind of a door that isn't like, you can't close that door. That that's long gone. So like, yeah, I think there's opportunity for it, but hopefully like people that are building things like that really think about the impact of them, so that it doesn't end up being something negative.
Right. We were talking about that basically in the context of like on Ethereum, a proposer could sell, future blocks, right? Maybe somebody comes along and buys 5 blocks in a row. Maybe that has like much worse, consequences than current state, and really hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
Stuff dealing with block space and MEV is a very difficult area to be in.
It is, man. And then maybe like to close here, I think one of the differences between Jito and how all of these problems are being handled on the Ethereum side is Jito does, this is like the common tagline, right? It's like Flashbots and Lido and Eigen Layer all rolled up into one. And I'm curious, like what are some of the synergies that you see, in with these different lines of business, right? Like I'm imagining there's a certain line of logic here between there was like tension even in between Lido and Eigenlayer. There's like co-opetition, right? Because at any one given point, someone could try to go upstream of someone else, and you guys don't have that issue. There's one entity. So what are some of the advantages, I guess, of that structure that you see? Like for instance, right? I guess the one of the tensions was like which when Eigenlayer open deposits, which LSTs were they going to accept, right? And so, and because the idea was, well, hey, a bunch of people already hold stETH, so maybe Eigenlayer or Lido just decides to open up a module in their staking router, which would be a restaking module, right? And so there's this kind of tension, and it ended up working out. But I could see, for instance, because you guys are the issuer of the largest LST, you could just kind of direct that. That could be another source of demand. For the LST, if you kind of make it the default in the staking platform, like just synergies like that, basically.
I think liquid staking tokens and restaking go hand in hand. So there's certainly like a flywheel that you can get there. The protocol is like doesn't really care about what assets are used, so it's not like you can like choose like you can't really enforce everything as Jito Sol based or any one LST or another. It's kind of up to the protocol. So yeah, I would say like the liquid staking side is definitely one of it. And then there's definitely a lot of applications and like research that's going on for restaking and MEV. And that's kind of another area that I think can potentially create like more utility than would exist otherwise.
Cool. Well, Lucas, I guess last very high impact question for you here is, who is going to be representing Jito at the golf scramble in Solana this year?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, Justin's really killer. Played golf with him in Austin. Brian as well. I'll be there.
How's the handicap looking these days?
Oh, dude, not good.
Just about having fun out there, you know?
Yeah.
It's not about the score.
Yeah. I mean, every time I go golfing, it's like, you want a beer? And then you're on the 18th hole and things are, you're having a good time. I'll say that. But
there's actually a bell curve. There's a beer parabola when it comes to golfing.
Yeah.
I really do think like 2 to 3 beers, I actually feel like you get better. And then you cross some line and it's like, yeah, it is downhill. It's
like
when
skiing.
The transfusion comes into play. I think the transfusion.
Yeah.
Same with skiing, I agree.
Yeah, like once you get over the can I hit this to like I'm gonna like whack this thing and I have the confidence to like use this tool properly, like like your skis or whatever it is. Yeah, that's where the magic happens. But I think we'll have to find a 4th person for our team, so we'll keep an eye out for that person.
All right, cool. Tryouts. Lucas, appreciate you coming on, man, and educating the audience. You guys are doing just a phenomenal job at Jito, so yeah, keep up the good work. If folks want to find out, you know, if they're a network or an AVS and they're interested in finding out more about the restaking platform, what's the best way to get in contact with you or someone from the team?
Yeah, go to the Jito network blog, and there's the restaking announcement at the bottom. There's a Google form. So if you are a potential operator or an AVS or an LRT or just want to find out more, fill out that form and someone from the Jito Foundation will reach out to you.
Beautiful. All right. Lucas, appreciate you, man. About to do it again.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was
Good
awesome.
time as always.
Thanks, Lucas.
All right, buddy. Great episode. This was a fun one to do with Lucas. I know this has been a long rumored project launch. So
we were just hoping that like we could talk about this within the within the timeline of the season, and fortunately got there at the 11th hour. So yeah, it was great. It was great chatting, and I think we have a lot to talk about.
So how did you leave this conversation thinking about what the market dynamics are going to be for restaking in Ethereum versus Solana?
So I think we talked about this a little bit on the episode, but you know, I think like security properties of different systems on Ethereum, or I guess security levels and security models is far more fragmented, right? Because so much more happens off chain because the L1 is just so expensive and unusable, right? In a lot of cases. And so I think instead of looking at like fully off-chain systems and figuring out how to leverage, you know, the base asset of Ethereum to like help decentralize them and help them, you know, kind of also like this alignment angle, right? Like driving value back down to the base layer. You know, I think it was really like kind of like a supply side original value prop for Ethereum. It was saying, okay, you want to be using all these applications and stuff like that. Also, there's a lot more off-chain networks that should be able to exist if you didn't have to spin up your own new staking token for them, right? With Solana, there's so much more that can happen directly on the L1, and frankly, like that is the stated purpose of Solana. That's where the roadmap, you know, is focused on. It's not necessarily where the market is always focused on. Like they have L2s coming as well, but I do think it's more like looking internally at what exists today and what are some central points of failure that can be decentralized to improve those systems, versus like Ethereum, where it's like, what doesn't exist today that could exist if we could basically export, you know, the base layer security, right? And so I think that's where it'll start on Solana. It's also very interesting. I mean, Solana has always been more of a demand side aligned chain. I feel like they, had no focus on like, like a burn or like, kind of like ultrasound money or anything like that accrues like direct value away from applications and users and to the base layer token. That's always been their approach. It's more like, let's build the best possible platform to develop applications, and value will just naturally accrue if we get tons and tons of usage of it, right? That seems to be reflected in Jito's approach, right? It's called a restaking platform, but it's not necessarily a restaking platform. It's just a programmable staking platform, which, I think all of these things are kind of like going towards that direction. Use any asset, right? Like including your own, right? So talk about like these governance tokens they're not, and like derivatives of them are not LRTs. They're just now adding staking utility, right, to the governance token and to whatever product and system the application has.
Yes. Okay, so I think this is getting at the crux of, we'll probably talk about this in the wrap-up episode, which is our last one of the season. But we started this whole season by drawing we had these two different buckets of restaking use cases, and we called it external, and then we sort of settled on feature addition as our other bucket. And the external is what everyone thinks of restaking now is, you rehypothecate your ETH and you use it to secure these other L1s or app chains or whatever, and you get yield. And then there's this other bucket where actually looking internally at Ethereum, within the operator set that it has, like how can we create a marketplace for opting into additional slashing conditions and performing other stuff. And it looked very separate, but I don't really view it as being separate anymore. And I think this is Symbiotic's point, is that those aren't separate. Really what you're talking about is like, stop looking at this as, just look at each one of these things as a network. And each network has a very similar challenge, which is, what does my staking, like what does the apparatus look like for my staking, and what should the role of my work token be within my ecosystem? And that is what these different restaking platforms are trying to solve. It's about alignment and security and the role of the token. And so I think that this is maybe like the Symbiotic insight, and it feels like that's how Lucas is thinking about things, and it feels like a more like to your point, a more fundamentally demand oriented approach than a supply argument. That said, I do still think that, I'm curious about, I guess, it's hard to pin down, right? Like what is the what is, however much TVL there is in Eigen Layer today. I know it's been down a little bit, but I think it's still around 13 or 14 billion. Order of magnitude, where are we heading in terms of, SOL? I would guess lower. I would guess probably lower than that by a decent margin.
Will it be? Yeah, could be interesting to see if like the TVL, also look at the proportions of TVL based off of what tokens make up the TVL, right? Maybe like Jito's restaking platform has $10 billion of TVL in a year, but 50% of it is not like Solana based tokens. It's like governance tokens and stuff like that, right? Whereas like Eigen Layer is really trying to drive home sort of like the benefits you get for the demand side, by really doubling down on like the core base asset and the amount, it's the most ubiquitous, it's the cheapest, et cetera, et cetera. It's an interesting.
So yeah, it's an interesting, like, I guess there's challenges on both sides, right? Like my sort of gut sense is that there's going to be less interest on the supply side because of this demand side posturing, and because they're leaning in from day one, accepting different assets. Like I think they're going to do probably better on the demand side of things, but get less on the supply side. On the other hand, Eigen Layer has this massive head start. They're the clear category lead. Everyone thinks of restaking, they think of Eigen Layer, but they're going to have to work through. They've got $13 billion worth of security TVL, and they're probably not going to have the demand side to match that.
No, totally. They also had like they tried to get the flywheel going with the supply side, right?
Right.
If you get a ton of supply, you'll draw mind share, right? Then the AVSs will come. And of course, a lot of the supply side, intrigue is because Eigen hadn't launched a token yet, right? So there was, and the LRTs hadn't launched tokens yet. So there was a lot of, like, I would say, a lot of the ROI from that, like, supply side value prop is it's kind of a point in time thing. Whereas Jito doesn't have that, right? Jito has a token out there. The LRT is coming to support it, may or may not have tokens already. And it is, I think they're focusing a lot more on the demand side first, which would be super interesting to see how it plays out. Because as great as it is to have like that $20 billion, supply side head start, it also makes you need to make up a lot of ground in terms of, yield to support that longer term, with AVS, reward tokens.
This makes me think of Babylon still, where I think that challenge is even going to be potentially higher because, if it plays, that's why I think the marketplace question is an important one to ask. Are these going to be cross-chain marketplaces or are they going to be siloed? I could see a future where you have much larger dominant applications and, and then I could see a world where maybe it looks a little bit more cross-chain, but for the immediate future, like the next 5 years, I find it very likely that it's going to be siloed, same way it is in liquid staking, right? And so, for something like Babylon, it might be a little challenging.
I don't know. I do feel like it will just look at the assets themselves. Like Bitcoin, we see exported to many different networks in terms of wrap Bitcoin. Ethereum, we see exported to a lot of different networks, especially like Cosmos, right? Kind of like in between. They love Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that's I think like a good exporting sort of path. Where I do think Solana is more like kind of introspective.
What's the market cap of wrap Bitcoin? I didn't think
it might not actually be that big now that I think about it, but
you know what I think that where that could actually happen the most. I know everyone's sick of this debate, right, on Twitter, but it would be interesting if like a big ETH rollup or something decided to settle to another L1 and took 10 or 15 or $20 billion worth of ETH over with it. I think that I honestly I think that's pretty unlikely, but that's how I could see that actually happening.
And the equivalent would be like, is Eclipse going to secure itself with restaked ETH or with restaked, like something like that? I think that's another question. But the other thing I've noticed is, again, like Symbiotic, saw the Athena announcement, right? Their partnership. And with Jito, we're talking about like, again, like much more of a focus on governance tokens. It's kind of, looking at existing projects and saying, how can you find some, can you improve your product and your system with staking? And does that have like downstream benefits to your token, right? Now your token has a reason, more of a reason to justify value capture. Assuming that the token holders are taking on some kind of risk with this, staking operation. And you and I were talking about it beforehand. We saw like Aave is working on some new tokenomics. They were like, one of the only, I would say, major DeFi protocols to have a staking token, have their governance token have some sort of staking element, right? And that was an insurance pool that backed up the protocol, and if there was ever a case of bad debt. And I'm very curious to see how many of I think everybody, like the general sort of belief is that if you can transform your useless governance token into a staking token, that's probably good for your token's market cap. Now, how many of those protocols that really want a staking token want to make your governance token a staking token have like a good reason to actually like come up with some sort of staking for it? I don't know, but we do now have like a way to make that very, very easy, where you don't have to, build in-house like this whole staking setup, which is probably super non-core to your business. Like, sure, that was resources that Aave could have directed towards the core lending market. Instead, they had to, engineer this like staking system. So yeah, I think that's just one other thing I've noticed is like definitely becoming more of a trend.
And something that we were also talking about is that maybe it's just different customer segments, and those have very different BD approaches. So I could imagine like the way that we've been conceptualizing restaking is, hey, there are going to be these interop protocols or layer twos or like DA solutions or whatever that just want to purchase a whole bunch of cheap ETH security, and these are new protocols for the most part that are spinning up for the first time. But then there's another category of protocols which, like, imagine if Eigen Layer or Symbiotic was working with Aave on their sort of staking redesign.
Totally.
Right?
Probably should be.
Probably, yeah. And although I got to shout out Aave here. I think the design change to Umbrella, which is the name of their new architecture, is pretty elegant. It's a good solution. Aave is no longer the token of last resort, which they have to sell to meet any bad debt. They're just users can opt into making their A tokens essentially act as the last resort. So you're matching your assets and liabilities, and then you can just burn. And if there's bad debt, you can just burn it. Whoever's opted into those additional, basically slashing conditions and rewards. But anyway, besides the point, so that is the opportunity. And so I do wonder if for some of these, maybe it's the Jitos or the Symbiotics or Eigen Layers of the world, if you want to pursue these types of engagements, that I would actually have to imagine you set up a really sophisticated BD team, and like protocol engineering team where, if you're going to be of any use to Aave in this situation, you have to be extremely sophisticated. And so I think that's going to be a big part of the opportunity. But I also see why, EigenLayer describes this as cloud. It's like really back end stuff. It's like how it's just back end that you're fixing here. So
yeah, totally. And you do notice like EigenLayer, yes, it did say permissionless innovation. Like that's been their mantra from day one. But they are the inventors, and so they're naturally a little bit more opinionated in putting out the like solutions to the market. Right? They put out the intersubjective work token. Seems like they've backpedaled on the veto council. I don't think they were ever like, really, I guess set. I don't think that was ever really set in stone as like you have to use this, but definitely have like backed off of that. They have like come up with StakeSure, put it out into the world. Like maybe here's a way to self-insure and to redistribute. Do more with less, basically for security collateral. And I think there's been good and bad parts, but they invented the word AVS, right? And in kind of creating the category, right, and creating and inventing these solutions associated with them, I think it's drawn a ton of mindshare to EigenLayer and to restaking, but it's also created an opportunity for counter positioning where, again, like Lucas was saying, let the market decide. Like, let's make this thing as flexible as possible. And so I do think that's where everything is kind of converging on. These will have very similar designs. The only differences in the designs across Symbiotic, Eigen, Babylon, Jito is just stuff that is based on the nature of the L1 where the logic sits, right? I think they'll all try to be as flexible as possible. They'll all go after like slightly different use cases, but it does feel like this going from like restaking to just this programmable staking platform is kind of where they're all converging on. And yeah, I think it'll just be super interesting to see if maybe the feature set or designs diverge again based off of like the use cases that they really end up getting a lot of traction for individually.
Cool, man. All right, I think we got to wrap it here. Big shout out to Jito. Honestly, one of the more interesting, frankly, protocols in all of crypto right now. They're doing an enormous amount of really critical work over in Solana. I think
crushing it.
They're crushing it. Looking forward to see what they continue to do. Miles, all right, buddy. This has been a fun season. This concludes the interview portion of the season. We got a wrap up episode.
Yes, then, we'll answer all of your questions.
Or probably just ramble. Honestly, probably ramble.
Probably just ramble, something like that. Yeah. Awesome, man. All right, buddy. Yeah, have a great weekend. See ya.
Yeah, you too, dude. Bye. Hey, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Want to give a final shout out to
Namada. Again, a team that is near and dear to my heart. They are building the Shielded Asset Hub, which is protecting the future multi-chain. Talked a little bit about how that works in the mid-roll, but for now, what I would highly recommend that you do is go check them out. They're in their mainnet launch phase. You can follow along with everything at namada.net. You can start rewarding yourself by shielding your actions and strengthening data privacy for all across the multi-chain. So thanks again, Namada, for all the great work that you're doing.